Good morning and welcome to Code and Coffee at Discourse Digital. Today we're going to take a look on how to check a URL with Google Apps Script and Google Sheets. What we want to do is take a fully qualified domain name, such as the one seen here from Unsplash, and check to see if the URL is valid. If it returns a status code, we can write an additional function to return the code and check against that. This is a great way to find broken SEO links. It's a great way to check product images before uploading them into your e-commerce catalog to improve efficiency. And otherwise, it's just a great way to check batches of links when there's not tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of them. Let's go and see how we can do this quickly with AppScript. And all we'll have to do is go into our Google Sheet, go to Tools and Script Editor. We can copy and paste the function below that I wrote for you, or we can write another function to do principally the same thing, specifically for your use case. And to use the function, all we need to do is enter the function name and the reference URL, as we would with a normal function. AppScript is very powerful, so let's see how to use it to check our URL easily. So here's our demo spreadsheet, which can be found on Google Sheets. This has the formula already written and copied into it, so you can see that we're checking the images and returning a checkbox if it's valid and an unchecked box if it's not. In the status code, we have another function that returns just the positive status codes, or it returns 400 if the image is not found, or returns a 500 error from the server. So let's see how we can do that. We can go to Tools, Script Editor, and you can find these functions in the GitHub repository listed in this blog article. Otherwise, you can use these directly from this demo spreadsheet to copy and paste into your own script editor. In future articles, I'll show you how to store this as a library so you can call it from as many sheets in your organization as you need. But for now, let's just check to see if the URL is valid, and for that, we're going to use this function right here. This uses the Google URL fetch service from Google Services within Google Sheets, meaning that your responses are not, your requests are not gathered in the browser before sending over to the server. So the server will handle the fetching, which means that you won't time out in the browser, which is nice. Otherwise, the URL fetch app class returns an HTTP response that we see from here from the fetch. And if we go down below, we can see it's as easy as calling the URL inside of the fetch method, and it's going to return an HTTP response that we can then call the get response code on to return an integer that we can check against our validation rules. So let's go and see how to do that real quickly. First, we set a status to null. Then we create an array of good status codes. These are the HTTP response codes from the fetch response. It's listed as an integer here. And it's useful to know the HTTP, which can easily be found in the MDN web docs. But we have ranges we can check, or we can check for individual codes, 200 being the one that we really want to check for, and that means that the request was okay. So if we go back over to our code, we can see I have 200, 204, 201, and 206 codes, which are acceptable in my use case. Different codes might be acceptable for your different uses, so check out this page and see exactly what they are. In the next line, we're just going to wrap the request in a try-catch so that we can set the status to true or false based on the response code that we find. So all we're doing is going and getting the response code using URL fetch service, the fetch method called on the URL that we're going to check in the adjacent cell, and then we're going to call the get response code method to return the integer as a response code. In the next line, all we're going to do is check that we have a response code and that it's not null or undefined. And then we're going to go into the good URL codes array and try to find the element that was returned from the response code, get response code method. If we find it and it's equal to the response code found in the array, we'll set the status to true. Else the status will be set to false if there's a positive return. If there's an error, it'll return the error, but in this case, I just want to set the status to false in case there is an error. Now, there are daily limits of 20,000 URL fetch requests on a personal Google account. So if the error is insufficient resources available because we exceeded the quota, then we'll have to modify our code to make sure that we are falling within our request range. On the business accounts in Google, there's 100,000 per day request limit on URL fetch. So keep that in mind when developing your own. The next function shows that we can stack functions in Google Apps Script and return as many as we need for use in our spreadsheet. In this case, we have one for checking the status as true and false, and one for just checking what the status code is returned as. In the URL status code function, all we're doing is checking the URL. We're setting a response code to null to begin with, and then trying to see what the response code is here. From the URL fetch method, we're calling the getResponseCode again, which returns an integer. If there was no response code received, or if it had a 500 error, it'll throw an error, which we'll receive down here. And what I'm just saying for now, if there is an error, let's set the response code to 400, meaning that it was unavailable. Again, this might come against your quota limits, or there might be errors in your scripts. So when you set the error handlers, be sure to set them to something that's useful for you. And in the final line, we're just going to return the response code, and that's exactly what we see in the status code box here. So if we want to use this function, we can go and delete these. And since the function is going to return true or false, I'm going to format this, insert a checkbox, and then I'm going to call the check URL function on the adjacent. Now that gives us the checkbox. So all I had to do was go over and insert a checkbox, and then insert the formula, check URL, and the reference cell. So now, if I want to go down and Control D, I can copy down, and it's going to check to see if those are valid. And likewise, with the status code, we can go and take this function name, without any formatting, insert it in here, reference our URL, and then do the same thing with Control D. This is a quick and easy way to check batches of images or broken links for SEO. It's a great method that's easily modified for your use case, or simply copy and paste the script as is. As always, thank you for joining me on Code and Coffee at Discourse Digital, and I hope you found this quick tip useful for your Google Sheets. Thank you, and have a great day.